Liam Halligan joins us. He's an economist and author of When the Facts Change, Substack. A very good afternoon to you, Liam.
Good to be with you, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. Now, I know you talk about lots of economic things an awful lot, but I would actually also love to hear your thoughts on just the conversation we've just had, because migration is a massive issue, and it's a massive economic issue as well, but also a cultural issue. But you've spoken out on a lot of these big issues in recent years. Do you think we should look at what the US is looking at?
I think we should look in general. The Overton window on immigration has shifted enormously in general. Until quite recently, the likes of the Office for Budget Responsibility, which I'm sure we'll be talking about in a moment, would say unequivocally more immigration is always and everywhere a good thing for the economy. It generates growth and so on. But in the last few months and years, the OBR and other economists have started to realise actually it's not just about immigration, yes or no. It's about the scope and the pace and the impact, not just on the national accounts, because if you have lots and lots and lots of immigration quickly and lots of it's unskilled, that's going to be a big burden on the public finances. But also it's a burden, it tears at the fabric of society. Of course, that's what we've seen across the country, not least with the outrageous policy of putting illegal immigrants into the heart of communities, into local hotels. It really winds people up and it scares people.
And understandably, given what we've seen recently, indeed.
Completely understandably. And I think this is a trend we're seeing across Europe, a lot more apprehension about immigration, even among very moderate people, from immigrant stock themselves, who have spent a lifetime being pro-immigration and actually being proud, rightly I would say, that in general the UK has been a pretty welcoming place.
Absolutely. But they've come here because they wanted to live in Britain and to assimilate and to live as a British person, not to bring, Pakistan here or Afghanistan or Somalia here. That's the reality. Now, listen, I ought to get to the topic I invited you on to talk about, and that, of course, is where we are with the fallout from the budget, not just us all reeling with tax rises and the huge amount of money that's going on benefits, but the extraordinary situation where the chief of the Office of Budget Responsibility being forced to fall on his sword yesterday after that report. An internal report basically said, this is a major management and leadership fail, where we saw the release of the details of the budget from the OBR 45 minutes before Rachel Reeves was due to speak, and probably about, best part of an hour and a half plus before they were due to actually release it because of just abject security failings themselves. He's gone because of of incompetence in leadership. She, however, is still in the job. Most people, I think, would say she was incompetent, but she's also now a proven liar. She lied to the public on November the 4th and claimed that there was a black hole in public finances, which she categorically knew on October the 31st from a report from the Office of Budget Responsibility, which they've since made public, that was not there. She lied to members of the cabinet, she lied to the media, she lied to the public then, and she lied on the floor of the House of Commons. And yet she's still in her job. How is he gone and she's still there?
I do think she's hanging by a thread, I have to say. Look, this has been, even before the OBR leak and even before, as you've just summarised, the accusations, the allegations, the revelations, you may say, of big differences of opinion between the OBR and misreporting by the Treasury and the Chancellor of what the OBR had told her. Even before all that, I wrote 3 weeks ago, this is the most chaotic run-up to a budget I've seen in 30 years of covering budgets.
It was absolutely extraordinary. And again, the fuss about the leak from the OBR, you've got to laugh when pretty much every single thing in that budget we already knew because it had been leaked by the Treasury.
So there are three things here. The first thing was, as you just said, the constant leaking by the Treasury of various details of the budget, what might be in the budget, what might not be in the budget. That led to real people making real irreversible decisions and real investments into the economy not happening because of the chaos. People drew down parts of their pension. People remortgaged their homes. People did, people left the country. People did all kinds of things because of lots of, pretty idiotic 25-year-olds around Rachel Reeves who think they're cleverer than everyone else, endlessly leaking and spinning and conniving, when actually these people know nothing about economics, nothing about financial management and are a complete net negative to the health of this country, and yet we're paying them overinflated wages so they can walk around Westminster feeling important in new shoots and new shoes. So that was the first thing. The second thing was then the insane leaking of the whole budget, almost an hour before Rachel Reeves stood up in the House of Commons. That was the second thing. That's the thing he's officially gone for, Richard Hughes, the guy who runs the Office for Budget Responsibility, or who did until 24 hours ago. That's the official reason he's gone, because there was an inadvertent leak, which probably was due to somebody, not quite getting the settings right.
No, but the report says very clearly this has happened before. We just didn't know about it because that's how incompetent they are.
Okay, just let me finish. Let me finish, please. Right. The second thing is the leak. And that was probably due to some kind of settings in an email program when there was it was scheduled wrongly. But the really crazy thing, right? Not the pre-budget spin, though that was crazy enough. Not the leak, though that was deeply incompetent and the official reason he's gone. The really crazy thing, and the thing that's really worrying financial markets, is that you had the OBR leaking internal discussions between the OBR and the Treasury in order to try and prove that, as you said, the Treasury and the Chancellor in particular had been, not telling the truth to financial markets and the public. That is mad, right? Yeah. That is crazy that you now have spin wars going on, not just between political parties, not even between political parties and the press. That's happened, since way before even you and I started reporting politics, Julia, which, with huge respect to both of us, was a long time.
Right. Oh, sorry, we have to cut off Liam now. Carry on, my love. No, we can't. No, Liam, you did realise... Are you kidding me? That was a joke. No, Liam, don't be a snowflake, my love. Try and get him back. What on earth happened there? That was...
The commitment to that practical joke is that
was a good commitment to that practical joke. That was hilarious. I don't know what's going on there. We're going to try and get him back. It's interesting, actually. One of the things he was pointing about, in terms of this, it is just like we've got this battle. We've got everyone's at loggerheads with each other. I like that the OBR is actually completely, independent.
Yeah.
That's a good thing, right? I mean, but not so. Not briefing against each other, but interestingly, two senior figures at the top of the OBR, they have actually been giving evidence this morning to a committee of MPs, and the boss was supposed to be there. Is there a concern that he's now outside the tent and he could be, should we say, to paraphrase a former US president, spitting inside the tent now?
Yes, I mean there's every possibility of that, but I would say ultimately, is that really going to change anything? Given that he's already, the OBR has already released the most damaging information possible, which is to say, no, actually, what the Chancellor of the Exchequer is saying is not the case. This was what she was told earlier on in the year. I think that's pretty much the most damage that he can do. Ultimately, I think it will be something that will be held against her later on as we go on. I think that this will be held up as a moment at which, this was probably the moment at which you couldn't come back, even if she held on for a period of time. I suspect, actually, no, he won't be somebody who actively sort of goes out and starts mouthing off in the press, because actually that could affect all sorts of things to do with his professional credibility as well. I think the damage has been done, though. I think, ultimately, we've all sat here going, oh, well, we were told that there was this black hole in the budget. The OBR said, no, these were the figures that we said. She's not telling you exactly what was discussed. I think we can all see what has happened there. He is, perhaps because of the leak, the early release, he is falling on his sword, and it'll be sort of framed in that way. But we all know what actually is going on here. The Chancellor has been made to look a fool and a liar, and she needs her own.
She made herself look a fool and a liar. I mean, she chose to do that. And the key thing is she kept saying it was my choice, but she also is very clear, the Prime Minister knew this, and he's been giving her all these hugs. The other thing yesterday was very interesting. He refused to say when he was asked, again, looking very, very irritated that people were daring to ask him questions. Imagine what he was like as Director of Public Prosecutions, good as be. He refused to say that spending on benefits would be cut at all at the next election. It was a speech about welfare reform, long supposed to have been on Monday morning, and then it ended up having to be like a basic defending the Chancellor's speech. Yeah. But the whole point of welfare reform is, right, the main aim of welfare reform is, one, to have people living better lives and not being on the scrap heap of life and getting them back to work, right, and making sure that the people who need welfare who really need it have enough, and I'd say a lot of those people who really need it don't get enough, and that's because it's being spread too thinly over too many people, but also to save the taxpayer a load of money. We have a ballooning, I mean, it's like, is it going up by like something more than £75 billion over by the end of the next decade, of this decade, sorry. I mean, we're going to have like 400 billion quid. Basically, amazing stat, 100% of the taxes that we pay, the income taxes paid, of all the income tax, basic, top rate, higher rate of that income tax, that all goes on benefits. Okay, a lot of that is pensions, fair enough. But, you know, people are old, they can't work. But we're talking about a huge sum of money on working age people. He refused to say there would be a cut at all by the next election. We know that Labour backbenchers won't allow that to happen. We cannot continue with these utterly unsustainable ballooning spending on benefits.
We can't afford it. Everybody knows we can't afford it, but people are still sort of hanging on in the desperate hope that their little special interest will be the one that is spared. You see the same thing actually when it comes to things like pensions. And again, you know, pensions are going to go up. The triple lock, you know, doing its job there and making sure that, you know, pensioners are shielded from things whilst the working population actually is hit much harder. The difficulty with all of this is, as you've just said, lots of Labour MPs running scared of their own constituents because the number of people receiving benefits are greater than their actual majorities. That's a major problem. What they're doing now is drawing the battle lines here. They're sort of egging on reform in some ways because a lot of those same seats are the ones that reform are targeting. And they're saying, well, effectively, we are going to be financially doping lots of the voters. Reform, you're coming in, you're saying you're going to cut the state, potentially you're going to lower taxes. How are you going to do it? How are you going to win over those voters and say, we're going to cut your benefits? Absolutely,
absolutely. I'm going to go a break in a couple of minutes. We can't get Liam back on the line. I don't think you realised. I was joking. Cut him off, as in a joke about us both being old. I thought it was rather obvious it was a joke. He's my old mate. But there we are. I don't know what's going on there. What can you do? Snowflakes. Anyway.